Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophets Speak. Today we are going to continue our study of the Book of Kings, the first Book of Kings, that's Melachim Aleph. We're about to study chapter 12, Perek Yud Bet, and we have just learned read at the end of 11 with the passing of Shlomo HaMelech, the passing of King Shlomo, and the fact that his son Rehoboam is set now to take over the kingship. We also learned of the troubles at the end of Shlomo's kingdom, which was a result of his straying from the path of God, from his following foreign idols, from his getting corrupted by his wealth and his horses, and most importantly by his multiple wives, which led his heart astray away from God. In chapter 11, we read two prophecies. One was a prophecy that God said to Shlomo. The other was a prophecy that God spoke through his prophet Achia Hashiloni to Yerav'am. Yerav'am, or Jeroboam, was an instigator of some troubles in Shlomo's kingdom. As Shlomo's kingdom was in its waning days, there was, because he had strayed from God, the troubles were popping up, rebellions were occurring in some of the subjugated or vassal provinces in Aram and in Edom. And within the people themselves, Yerav'am was leading somewhat of not really an insurgency yet, but people that were protesting Shlomo's treatment of the common folk. And Yerav'am had run away to Egypt, and Yerav'am had received a prophecy as well. And I want to take this opportunity to discuss a little bit the nature of prophecy. One of the issues that many people have with the chapter we're about to study together is God had predicted, or he had prophesied, that the kingdom would split, that Yerav'am would be the king of the 10 tribes that split away from the Judea. So both Rehoboam was likely to have known the prophecy that was told to Shlomo, which was, because of your misbehavior, I'm going to split the kingdom up, right? And Yerav'am for sure knew the prophecy that he was going to become king of the 10 tribes. But nonetheless, it is presented in chapter 12 as if those events were the result of human behavior, result of terrible mistakes that Rehoboam made, and eventually Yerav'am too. That Rehoboam, who eventually became the king of Yehuda, of Judah, and Yerav'am, who eventually became the king of Israel. So, because they knew that these events had been predicted and prophesied, to what extent are they responsible for the deeds? Why is it, for the deeds which brought that about? And I want to submit here, and this is very important. We've emphasized these ideas until now, and this is very important to understanding the Bible in general and prophecies in particular. And that is that a prophecy is not a prediction of events that is going to happen. That's not at all what it is, never what it's meant to be, and that's not even how the prophecies are presented. Let's look carefully at the prophecy that was spoken to Shlomo that we studied together in chapter 11. What did God say to Shlomo? In chapter 11, verse 11. Vayomer Adonai l'Shlomo, God said to Solomon, Ya'an asher hoita zoti mach, because this is the way you are behaving. V'lo shamarta briti v'chukosai, and you have not kept my covenant and my chukot and my laws, asher tiviti alacha, that I have commanded you. Therefore, koroa ekrat hamamlochome alacha nasati le'avdecha, I am going to tear the kingdom apart, and so on and so forth. And God goes on. God very clearly states that as a result of this behavior, therefore such and such is going to happen. Which also leaves open the possibility that if Shlomo or his son should improve their behavior, maybe this decree can be changed. No decree, and we find this throughout the words of the rabbis and Chazal, that bad decrees can always be rescinded if people repent, if people learn their ways. And now let's look very closely at the language with which God spoke to Yerav'am through his prophet, but still God speaking to Yerav'am. What was the language that God used? And let's look at this clearly here. Vayomer li Yerav'am, so on. He said, to tear the cloak up. And he said in verse 33, Ya'an asher azavuni, because they, meaning the house of David, has forsaken me, vayishtachavu lashdored, and they bow down to these idols, and so on and so forth. V'lo holchu b'derechai, they did not go in my ways, la'asot hayashar beinai, to do what is proper in my eyes, u'v'chukotai u'mishpatai, and my laws and my and my rules. Right? That's why therefore I'm going to make you king over half, and so on. So what Yerovam and Rehoboam are actually going into this what we're about to read in the next chapter, this next very important point, which ended up being a horrifically tragic point in the history of the Jewish people and the history of the people of Israel, is they both know that the tearing apart of the kingdom is dependent upon the behavior of the king, and most specifically, the sitting king right now, who is Rehoboam. And Jeroboam knows that once the kingdom splits and he becomes king, how long and how successful his kingship will be depends on his behavior. Unfortunately, as we've seen so many times, despite people knowing how much is riding on their decisions and how much depends on the decisions that they're about to make, they still make the wrong decisions and bring about tragic and terrible results. I mean, case in point, Shlomo HaMelech himself. The king Shlomo had been definitely warned over and over again through the Torah itself not to accumulate too much wealth, not to accumulate too many wives, not to accumulate too many horses. And Shlomo disobeyed those rules and ended up corrupting himself and ruining his kingdom. In the same way, Rehoboam is about to go into his job, which is to try to maintain and keep the kingdom together and try to keep the legacy of his father and his illustrious father and grandfather, and move it into future generations, for posterity. But he's going to fail anyway. So here we go. So this just shows the height of arrogance that people have, that despite knowing and being forewarned and understanding what's coming up, they're still going to make this mistake. Vayelech Rehoboam Shechem. Rehoboam went to the city of Shechem. Why? Because Ki Shechem ba'chal Yisrael amlichoto. Because to Shechem, the entire people of Israel had come in order to make him king. Now this is important. Kol Yisrael, all of the people. So at this point, there is no thought of separating. The people come together, all the tribes come together. They are one nation. They've been unified since the days of David. They've been unified through the days of Shlomo, and they intend to be unified and crown Rehoboam as king over them all. Vayehi, and it was Kishma Yeravam ben Nevat, that Yeravam ben Nevat heard of this. V'hu odenu b'Mitzrayim, at the time he was still in Egypt. Remember, he had run, Asher barach mipnei HaMelech Shlomo, he had run away from King Shlomo. Vayeshev Yeravam b'Mitzrayim, he had been hiding in Egypt because Shlomo was searching after him to kill him. So Yeravam had run to Egypt for protection. So Vayishlechu, the people sent Vayikra'ulo, and they called him back. With the impression that we get here is that Yeravam heard that Rehoboam was crowned, but Yerovam did not pick up himself and go back, not knowing maybe the people will be loyal to Rehoboam, the new king, right? And maybe there's no place for me, and if I go back, I'll still be in danger. But then the people called for him. Then Yerovam knew that he had support. So Vayavo Yerovam v'chol kal Yisrael, and then Yerovam came, and with the entire congregation of Israel. So this would seem like all the tribes. Under the leadership of Yerovam representing them, Vayidabru el Rehoboam le'mar, and they spoke to Rehoboam saying the following. So here Rehoboam has just sat down on his throne, and Yerovam, who is his father's nemesis, representing the people, and presumably the other leaders of the Kahal Yisrael, of the congregation, came and made the following request of Rehoboam. Avicha hiksha et uleinu, your father made our yoke heavy. He overburdened us. And this is a sense that we got at the end of Shlomo's reign, that the burden of work and taxes and everything to maintain this vast kingdom was getting very, very difficult. And you now, please, lessen and decrease lighten the work that your father, the difficult and tough labor that your father made us do. And from the very heavy yoke that he put upon us, and then we will all serve you together. So here they are under Yeravam's leadership, asking Rehoboam and pledging their loyalty. All we ask for is a lesser burden. Give us something, and then we will all be. Now, implicit in this is that if you don't lighten the load, we will not serve you. Presumably, this prophecy that was told to Yeravam was already known. People already knew that Yeravam was a potential leader, but Yeravam was understanding the directive as God gave this prophecy was, if Rehoboam were to act in a noble and just and proper way, then the kingdom will remain united under Rehoboam. And maybe, and then the kingdom will not be split. Vayomer aleim, he said to them, Lechu od shlosha yamim v'shuvu elai. Go away for 3 days, leave my place for 3 days, v'shuvu elai, and then come back. V'yilcham, and the people left. Rehoboam is new to the throne. So he needs 3 days to think it over, to talk to his advisors. One thing that Rehoboam does not do is talk to a Navi, does not talk to a prophet. He does not consult God. But he does consult another group. Rehoboam went to ask the elders, those that were like the king's council in Solomon's days, Aviv, Shlomo his father, when he was still alive. And he asked to them, how do you advise? What word should I answer this nation, based on what they asked me? The elders, having had a lot of experience, would probably have seen Shlomo's kingdom in its decline, and they would know and understand fully that that Rehoboam's grip on the people is not nearly as strong as Shlomo's was. And they understood that he needs to show the people that he's willing to work with them. So Vayadabru elav leimar, and they spoke to him as follows: Im hayom tiyeh eved la'amazeh va'avad tam. If today you act as a servant of the people and you serve them, va'anisam, and you answer them, in other words, you respond to them, v'dibarta aleihem dvarim tovim, and you speak to them things that are good words that they want to hear, v'hayu l'cha avdim kol yamim, then for the rest of the days they will always be your servants. Here lies the key to a successful king in the biblical and Jewish concept of what a king is. The king is the servant of the people. Show them today that you are the servant of the people and you serve them. Then they will know that they should be loyal to you. Vaya'azov et atzat hazkenim asher ya'atzuhu. But he ignored the advice of the elders that gave him that advice. Vayivo'at et hayiladim, and he talked to the younger ones, asher gadlu ito, that had been raised with him. So these were his friends, his buddies, that were younger, that were first coming into power. Asher homdim lefanov. These are the ones that stood with him, that stood in front of him, not the ones that were his father's advisors. Vayomer aliyem, and he said to them, Ma'atem no'atzim, what advice do you give in Ashiv Davar Atomazeh that I should answer? Asher dibru elai leimor, that they said to me, Hakel min ha'ol asher nasana v'chaleinu, that you should lighten the burden that your father placed upon us. Vayidabru elav ha'iladim asher gadlu ito leimor, and the young ones who had grown up with him answered him as follows: Kol somar la'amazeh, this is what you should say to this nation. Asher dibru elecha leimor, the ones that spoke to you. This is how you should say: Avicha hechbidet uleinu, v'ato hakel me'aleinu. Your father, right? The ones that said to you, your father made our yoke heavy, and you please make it light. Ko tedaber alehem. This is what you should say: Katani ava mimasnei avi. My little pinky finger is thicker than my father's thighs. Right? Meaning, you think my father was tough, I'll be so much tougher. That saying is a saying which means, I am to him like My pinky is tougher than his thigh. It's a way of saying you think he's tough. I'm much tougher. My father imposed a heavy burden upon you. I will add on your burden. My father, this is another like a saying, a metaphor. My father punished you with whips. I am going to punish you with scorpions. So in other words, I'm going to punish you much worse. And Yeravam and all of the people came to Rehoboam on the third day, Kasher Diber HaMelech, as the king had said, Lemor, when he said, Shuva Elai B'yom HaShlishi, that you should come back to me on the third day. Vayan HaMelech et Am Kasher, and the king answered them with harsh words, Vayazov et Atatzaz Kenim Esher Yatzuhu, and he forsook he ignored the advice that the elders had given him. Vayidaber Aleim, and he said, Katzat HaYeladim Lemor, just like the advice that the young ones had given to him, saying as follows, the word for word, right? My father made your yoke heavy, I'm going to add on it. He punished you just with whips, I'm going to punish you with scorpions. The king did not listen to the people's request. And this verse says, because God had made this occur, Leman hakim et devaro, in order to fulfill his words, Asher diber Adonai, biyad achia hashiloni el Yerovam ben Nevat, because to fulfill his prophecy, right? Because God had made this prophecy happening. Now, this verse. The verse can be understood in many ways. The most obvious way to understand this would somewhat contradict with the way I began this podcast. And that is to understand it as saying that the king did not listen to the nation because God was the cause of all of this, because God wanted to bring about the fulfillment of the prophecy that he said to Yeravam ben Nevat. And indeed, many commentaries understand it this way. I would like to point out a few things here that are different, that actually show that what the verse says is, if anything, the opposite of that. Let's read this verse carefully now. V'lo shoma hamelech el ha'am. It was the king who did not listen to the nation. So the first words of this verse are emphasizing that this decision made, the one who decided to take this terrible advice and act in such an inconsiderate and irresponsible way, was the king himself, was Rehoboam. He was the one who made the decision not to listen to the nation. Ki haitzah siba, right? Me'im Adonai, because the cause of all of what resulted from that was from God, right? Leman hakim et devaro, because God, in order that God would achieve his promise. In other words, what the verse is telling us is the king made the decision. Rehoboam made the decision not to listen. And then everything that resulted from that, the Siba, was God fulfilling the promise that he had made. If you read this verse carefully, that's what you'll see. And this is not, so in other words, what really is happening here is what happens everywhere. We as human beings make the decision to act in a certain way, be it the proper way or the improper way. And then the cause, the result of that decision, the effect of that decision happens the way God designed it to happen. God set up a world in such a way that you're going to act in such a horrific and such a irresponsible and such an inconsiderate and such a cruel way, the result will be rebellion. The result will be a revolution. So this would conclude verse 15, and I would, we'll stop here for the first half of this chapter. The next half of the chapter, we'll read what the end result was of this terrible decision on the part of Rehoboam, the first and worst decision of Rehoboam's career, and one which would have lasting effects throughout history. Thank you so much for paying attention, for studying together with me. Looking forward to studying the rest of this chapter and the wonderful book of Kings together. Have a wonderful day.